it's important in a certain risk class, which I think it applies for core assets essentially across the globe, where you're trying to contract tenants with a global reach, with a fight for talent, with its own strategy of sustainability, etc. So I think in core assets, both retail, office, logistics, etc., you need to apply that sustainability issue. On other assets, I think it becomes secondary because it becomes more price sensitive. So the cost of having a sustainable building then gets set off by costs and by more, well, probably more important issues then. But I think there'll be a second stage coming, something that we discussed last week on a conference, is the ability of buildings. I think sustainability will become ingrained and is relatively clear in the markets now for the past 10 years that it has a certain necessity. But I think the aspect that we were discussing a week ago was the idea of a healthy building. Not the building itself being healthy, but the people, focusing on the people within the buildings, meaning the well-being of people in buildings. And I think that's going to be the next, I'll call it, as most things are, a marketing tool first, but an application that people will demand somewhere down the line. In the war and the fight for talent, what you're going to see is that you need to be in the right location and you need to provide space for people to do their work with a high standard, meaning, is the air exchange good enough? Is it a good climate within the building? Does it provide for areas where they can pull back, for exercise, for whatever, power napping, eating granola bars in a perfect environment, and being able to lie down on a gel bed for 15 minutes, which makes them even more brilliant 10 minutes later, whatever these millennials want. It does, I know. We were just born 20, 30 years too early, that's the thing. That's why we always look at it with a certain part of jealousy that they're getting this. But they're already acting like my kids now, and they're 4 and 7, so you know, the post-millennials are going to be even worse. So that is my worry. But indeed, that is the expectation. You get less people, you need, your people are competing with technology, which will all make their life easier, but maybe more compact. So it's a dilemma of compact working areas, but breakout areas. Good sense of, you know, they're all walking around with their, whatever they're called, I don't wear one as you can see, fit stuff, you know, that you know exactly how many steps you've taken and how many times you blink a day, and, you know, did I get enough air today and enough oxygen and enough, and all these things. I mean, we were talking about AirPods on streets for clean air. So clean air is the next thing coming, and your building needs to provide that. And if you combine that with sustainability, I think then you will have a viable, competitive product somewhere down the line. The question that we weren't able to answer was, who's going to pay for it? Yeah? And do you have the rental growth to supply that kind of a quality for that tenant? Or is the landlord simply going to have that as an expense on his account, which comes into your question, when you redevelop or when you develop and you want to take these things into account, will the tenant pay for it? And there'll be a few big, you know, the big gang of 4 who will. But if you want to need that to compete, well, is the landlord going to have to pay for it? Because your rental growth isn't going to apply. So that'll be interesting to see, but we had that discussion with the sustainability issue as well, and that's managed to make it into the buildings. So I'm assuming that will as well.
Maybe one thing from my point of view when it comes to office investments, we stepped out of residential because we're kind of afraid of regulation in any kind and unpredictability, whatever comes. This was true for residential. We as CORESTATE say that we cannot predict what will happen to office spaces and the way that people will work in the next 10 years. Not only from this well-being concepts that are discussed, but also from the IT landscape that is changing dramatically. So are you as an office investor not afraid that anything that you are building now or buying now will be out of time from an IT perspective in 5 years time, for example? I cannot even imagine because I'm not an IT guy, but I think you know what I'm talking about.
Look, at the end, an office building will always have a shell and core. One thing is always going to happen. We're still going to be tenants in a building. Yeah? Your building has to have certain technical facilities to be able to supply for certain things. I'll give you an example, air. You know? The pure idea of air. Thing is, a lot of buildings built in the 80s and 90s, they cannot extend their airflow into the building because the building structure doesn't allow for it. They're simply too small, too constrained. So those are things that you now need to look at on the technical level when you're buying into assets or when you're refurbishing your assets. Other issues like technical stuff, if anything, it's going to become more nimble, and it's going to become less a drag on the building, because it's not going to be a LAN or a whatever they're called, LAN 15. It'll be a wireless application, more or less. If you can go to the park now for your wireless at a high tempo, it'll be the same for an office. But of course, there will be elements that a building will need to supply for. But we've had that discussion with residential, and I think it's even a higher impact there than it is on trying to adapt where life is going to be, how much space somebody needs, how big the families are going to be, how many single, how many family, etc., and what kind of life do you need in a fully urbanized areas without without people getting at their throats because it's so close. I think offices is the easier part of that than the residential part. You will more or less have more tenants fitting out the way they want to. I mean, we have Facebook and Google and Twitter. We have them all as tenants. You literally just give them shell and core, and they'll do the rest. So it's their issue. As long as the building structure holds out, you're fine.
I had an just the last point on this. I had an interesting conversation with a guy from Amazon in Vienna last week, and he told us that they now joined the corporation of developers in the US that are now creating residential stuff in a way that they can be delivered in the future by drones. So if you buy at Amazon whatever you want, then now the developers in the US start to build residential areas that can be easily delivered by drones, which means that the balconies are in a different shape than we have, for example. So I can only agree that for residential, the technical impact might be even higher, but some challenges in the future, definitely.
Maybe just a comment on the sustainability thing. I think after 10 years evolution in Germany, it's time to bring the truth on the table, which is maybe a harsh sentence, nobody want to pay for green, full stop. I know that because I'm a strong believer and a pusher of the green thing, but the tenants don't want to do that. They pay more for a special location or a new building or whatever, but we all failed, realistically and self-critical speaking, by counting the green premium. This was the big door opener for us to say, well, if you make these investments in that, then you get a green premium. I'm still struggling after 10 years' time. Who can I really make a green premium measurable? A purely green premium, not the location and not the tenants, all these things. There is all in the market, there are always a kind of an avant-garde, don't get me wrong, who want to pay for that. But the big rollout we don't see. On the other hand, and this is again where I think Philip mentioned this, that you can see it in Munich city center and Hamburg city center, you see it in the big grade A. So this means from a capital market approach, obviously green works. Facade or shade of green, let's say this. Shade of green works obviously in the A and some parts of the B location, but it's not the measurable impact on that on the office side, not on the retail side. Where is it negatively driven is on the residential side, of course. All the NFs, these NF bring a lot of, let's say, turbulences in our valuation expectation because they jump every second year from Berlin to the rest of the resi factor Germany and say, well, NF 2014, 16, 18, just speaking very rational, which means we have to devaluate the asset price due to this negative impact on these, let's bring out of 5 years capex activity in your cooling heating on your facade to 10 years. Again, sounds nuts, but this is again, so I think that it was a big positive sentiment for the market, but it's not as positive as it seems. And sorry, last comment on that. The new trigger for these days, I think we share the same conferences, are the well-building and the healthy places phenomenon. Yeah, it's a big door opener. But I have my doubts right now because I get older now. Say, is there really a well-building risk premium? I have my doubts, to be honest. Yeah.
They're not looking at your health. They're looking at the young guy's health. Yeah? We're out of the picture by then now.
No.
Two things. I agree. I mean, maybe just to answer the premium issue. I don't think it's a rental premium, but you're actually getting the tenant premium. Yeah? That's the one side that you need to take into account, and that's going to be the wellness issue as well. Again, look, lower demographics, lower square meters per person. To be effective, thank God, little development going on in that segment. On the one hand, again, trying to buy it is difficult, but no future massive oversupply, taking Poland out of the question, maybe. So you will need to have that kind of an issue to be competitive for these unbelievably spoiled brats called millennials. Well, they are. Yeah. I mean, just look at what they're getting for nothing. Yeah. I mean, it's unbelievable. Yeah. Yeah. Take a look around. Half of them don't have any hair. And if the millennials would, it's shaven. Anyway, the other part, and of course, there is a discourse in that, and that whole green aspect, and I fully agree on the residential side. What you're finding is you have the big political discussion on affordable housing in Germany. And building on NF 2016 makes it almost unpayable. And to an extent and to a quality, typical German engineer-driven, where it makes no sense. If you just take the NF 214 again, you can actually build affordable housing. Yeah? But NF 2016 and the land prices going where it is ludicrous. You cannot have that as a tenant. Even on social resi in areas in Berlin, or just take any city, an owner-occupier, an owner redoes the building. He can more or less put, I think, 30–40% of that cost back to the tenant. Due to the NF 216 things that he does, the tenant then can no longer pay that rent because it's a 30–40% rental increase. So there's a limit to how green things can be in a realistic, urbanized environment that we're heading towards.